Amy loved her college years. Varsity basketball, student leadership, lifelong friendships. But life got busy, and over time, she drifted away from her alma mater. Then, an email changed everything. A student, just like she once was, needed advice. It wasn't a donation ask. It wasn't a long-term commitment. Just a chance to help. Amy answered, suggesting a call. It took minutes, but for Jacqueline, it meant everything. A real connection. The advancement team saw Amy was engaged. They reached out, not for a gift, but to thank her, to invite her back into the community. Amy realized how much she missed being part of this world. She joined a panel. She met students. She felt the impact she could have. And when the time came, giving back wasn't a question. It felt like the next step. This is the power of Protopia. Not another alumni engagement platform. Not another fundraising tool. A smarter way to engage alumni where they are, creating real connections that lead to real impact. See the ripple effect in action. Visit protopia.co today.
Hey everyone, and welcome. Thank you for listening to Alumless World for June 13th, 2025. This is the Recruiting Advancement Leaders Edition. On Alumless World, we talk about constituent engagement strategies and education advancement from a global perspective. I'm Ryan Catherwood. I'm joined by Nicole Kempton. Hello, Nicole. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. I just noticed that new Protopia ad that we have, which is pretty swish.
pretty banging background music on that ad, I would say. Yeah. We publish a new episode of Alumless World every other Friday, and we broadcast a 30-minute bonus segment that is available only by podcast version. So if you're listening to the podcast, we thank you so much. We appreciate you adding us to your feed. And we invite you to follow CMAC Chris Marshall Advancement Consulting on LinkedIn. And of course, if you find Alumless helpful, please do share it out with your networks so that more folks can find it. We appreciate Max and the team at Protopia for being our Alumless World presenting sponsor. All right. Well, I am excited very much for today's show. Today's guest, Jocelyn Kelty from Richmond Associates, is someone I have known for some years now. And I'm very excited to hear her thoughts about today's advancement space and doing some recruiting across the world, but particularly in Australia. So I've already sort of indicated who our guest is, Nicole, but why don't you sort of introduce her and then we'll bring her out.
Let's bring her out. Jocelyn is, as Ryan said, the director of the Australia office for Richmond Associates. And I'm sure that pretty much everybody who's listening has probably heard of the firm, and they're just a behemoth in the advancement recruitment space. And so I think we're in for a treat today. Hello, Jocelyn. How are you?
Hi, Nicole. Hi, Ryan. I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for staying up late to record this with us.
8 o'clock's all right.
Well, maybe we can get started with a little bit of background about you. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the advancement space and specifically Richmond Associates? Because I know you have a long history with the firm.
Yes, it's, I think LinkedIn told me it's probably been about 16, 17 years now. So quite the history. But yes, I started my tertiary education was in music at the New South Wales Conservatorium of Music. After a short stint in law, which I really didn't like very much at all. So finished a music degree and really wanted to work in arts administration. That was the plan. I wasn't sure how that was going to pan out, but I found a little bit of a foot in the door. A friend had an opportunity at Opera Australia in Sydney, the Australia's biggest opera company. I started managing their Friends program. I soon sort of moved into a little bit of individual giving and then their corporate development team. And I thought this is a fantastic place to work. I get to learn all about fundraising. But at the same time, myself and my husband had decided that we wanted to go to the UK. So I told the opera company, I'm sorry, we're heading off to the other side of the world. And it was actually someone at Opera Australia that mentioned Richmond Associates and said, if you're looking for a fundraising opportunity, go and talk to them. And I'd actually forgotten about them. So we went to London. I've spent the first sort of couple of weeks looking around, meeting lots of arts organisations. I just wanted to work at Covent Garden. And then I found this fantastic role with, I think it was English National Ballet and Individual Giving. And Richmond Associates was doing the work. So I got an interview with them by this consultant who had this very similar background to me from New York Opera. She had come across to London, was now working with Richmond Associates, and she gave me the bad news that I didn't get the role with the English National Ballet, but instead invited me to come and work with Richmond Associates. And I said,
that's not bad, right? Yeah.
I don't do recruitment. This wasn't the idea. This is not why I'm in London. So, but I did. I took the role after sort of really thinking about it. And look, the rest is history. I have learned so much about advancement, about fundraising, much, much more than if I think had stayed at the opera company. It's been a fantastic learning opportunity, and certainly not what I expected. If I sort of told my former or younger self that I was going to be in recruitment when I was older, wouldn't have believed it. So here we are.
Funny how that works for so many of us. I think lots of folks who are in the advancement space, would broadly speaking say they never imagined that would be the career path that where they ended. But maybe, Jocelyn, you could share a bit more about Richmond Associates, what the firm does, if I'm an advancement leader, why I might want to hire Richmond Associates, and then also, what should a prospective candidate know about Richmond Associates, and sort of follow along the various openings that are out there.
Yeah, so Richmond Associates, we've got a little pitch. We match the best talent in fundraising, advancement and engagement with mission-driven non-profit organisations. So we're trusted for our team, our people, our processes, and we're really the only specialist search firm that recruit in this space, with offices in the UK, in Asia and here in Australia. So we're 25 years old, and we started in the UK in 1999. The Australia office opened, I think, in 2010, and it was formally sort of incorporated in 2011. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we actually opened our Asia office in 2019 as well. So pride ourselves on our international reach when it comes to recruitment. We recruit all the fundraising, advancement, engagement roles at all levels. So we might be engaged to recruit a director of advancement or a chief advancement officer with a big university. We might be asked to recruit a mid-level trust and foundations role for an arts organisation, something more generalist, something quite specific. But overall, it's our specialism is the knowledge of the profession and our international presence. Funnily enough, all of our consultants have actually worked internationally. So we consider ourselves citizens of the world. And I think that's really helpful, both for organisations, but also for candidates talking to us, particularly if they want to move from one side of the world to the other. We can tell them about our roles that we have, but we can also tell them the other sort of 50% of the move, which is really, what it means to move lock, stock and barrel. So I think we've got a really good and unique insight into the profession, which I think organisations really rely on in terms of engaging with us and retaining us to help recruit their opportunities. We've also helped a number of organisations build their advancement teams. So particularly if they're moving into campaign, for example, they might retain us to recruit a number of opportunities. We don't just recruit, though. We like to sort of play a bit of a part in the sector, and as our tagline says, do the greater good. So we attend and speak at conferences. We take up networking opportunities. We host roundtables. We sometimes contribute to podcasts. Anything that helps really leverage our relationship with those in the sector. So that's Richmond Associates as a bit of an intro.
In fact, I remember just last summer at Case Summit in New York City, having the chance to catch up with Judith Marks and Benghui Chua, I think was there as well at the time. But maybe you mentioned the setting up of the Australia office back in 2010, 2011 time range. Could you talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities that you encountered while setting up the firm in Australia? And then also maybe just bring it to present day. Like, what are some of the present day challenges that you have to tackle in leading a recruitment firm?
Absolutely. Setting up the Australia office was never a planned thing. We had done a lot of, I guess, back and forth in terms of international recruitment into the UK from Australia. So we had a lot of connections. We had done a lot of work with Case in sort of helping to build the Asia Pacific side of things. So when we had to sort of cut our time in London short a little, due to the GFC and the fact that my husband was in engineering and didn't have a lot of work to do at that time, I spoke to our managing director at the time and said, what am I going to do now? I've only just sort of really started to cut my teeth at Richmond Associates, but now we're sort of heading back to Australia. So the idea just came up, why don't we give this a go in Australia, given some of the connections and some of the similarities of organisations, the cultural similarities as well. So we took a bit of a punt, started doing some work with the University of Queensland, and after I had to finish doing all my travel, much to the dismay of the poor university waiting for me, we placed 2 roles in the first 3 months of us coming back to Australia. I had some arts connections from my previous work at Opera Australia, and it all sort of built from there, really, through referrals and attending various conferences and just putting our name out there. It was, in terms of timing, I think, a really, really good time from an advancement perspective, particularly in the universities. There were a couple of sort of big hires at the time, which meant that a lot of people were investing a lot more in this space and therefore looking to a search firm that had that sort of expertise. So I think from that perspective, that was a really big opportunity, and we could make a lot of headway particularly in Australia. But there were a lot of challenges. To start with, there wasn't any, not a lot of organisations, I should say, had very strategic recruitment processes. So a lot of things were done by handshake. It was all about who you know. There wasn't that sort of competitive rigour around the processes that we certainly know now. So with every organisation that we worked with, we had to sort of build that in. Some of the universities, I think, did that quite well, but particularly with arts organisations and other sectors, there was certainly a lot to do on that front. There had also been a few not great international hires before we opened the office here. So we were sort of met with, we understand that you've got, international offices and this space, but we really don't want, to hire people from this place or that place, just from a fear of not being able to acclimatise and other such things. And as it happened, the first hire that we did was an international hire from North America. So I think it was working with organisations to sort of have them understand that we can be utilised for our specialism, not only in understanding advancement and fundraising, but that we know what that cultural alignment needs to look like. And we do test that from the get-go. In terms of who's going to work in the role in the right way and who's going to really align with the philanthropic landscape and network here. So it was challenging to start with, and those, I think, challenges aren't as prevalent now. I think we've got a few others, probably notably the fact that there are so many more of us now. People have, and look, I think that's credit to the profession and how much it's grown and how rapidly it's grown here in Australia. But it does mean that, we sort of perhaps pitching ourselves a little bit more and pushing ourselves out there a little bit more, not perhaps relying so much on that immediate sort of referral. But I think, it's, as I say, all credit to how far we've come in terms of expanding the profession.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, Jocelyn, I know you work with clients across the sort of nonprofit mission-driven sector, right? So, you could be doing, you're running a search for a university one week and then an arts organization the next. Are there things that are just that you've noticed make for a good recruitment process across all those sectors, no matter what? Or are there things that are kind of specific to arts organizations or specific to university advancement that make for a good search?
We try and keep to the same process and stick to our, I guess, the tried and tested process, if you like. And that was very much a part of establishing a sort of strategic and a very sort of defined process, making it very, opportunistic and equal for everyone, all of those sorts of things. So, yes,
tell us a little bit more about that process, because that's come up a couple of times. I'm just curious at a high level what that is.
Our process.
Yeah.
Well, when we start working with any organisation, I think the first really important thing is a briefing with the organisation. So talking to as many stakeholders within any organisation, any sector as possible to get a good sense of what they're looking for in terms of the role, in terms of experience. But just as important is to understand the culture of the organisation and therefore what is the personality of the company, and therefore who's going to sort of align with that and match with it. Once we've got that, then we go away and create a beautiful little information for candidates pack with all of the information that the candidates need, and we've honed that so that we know the information that's going to be most helpful for them. We guide both our client organisations and our candidates through a search process. So we reach out to lots of people in our database and through our networks. LinkedIn has fast become a big part of our search as well. And then we come back to the organisation with a list of people or a pool of people that we've interviewed, and then work through that sort of interview process with them to find that perfect match. So I think it's the rigor around that process that's been really helpful. And as I said before, it was a little bit loose to start with. So, but in terms of working with different sectors, I think it's just being mindful of. They do differ in a number of ways, and that can be size, it can be budget, it can be salaries. But we do try and encourage organisations to, consider people from other sectors, because I think that's really important in terms of the background and the experience that they bring, and means that people, I guess, expand the profession in that way. Philanthropy also means different things to different sectors and different organisations. So, for example, in a university, philanthropy is a small percentage of the overall income, albeit these are big sort of philanthropic operations in our universities, whereas some of our bigger charities, arts organisations, it's a really big revenue source. So really understanding that difference and making sure that our candidates that we talk to understand that as well, and therefore they're going to be resourced differently. Just the sheer size and nature of the organisations, going from a small arts organisation where you might be involved in all things fundraising to something a little bit more siloed or specialised. It's all a matter of gauging what candidate is going to match with what sort of organisation, what sector. So we try and keep it as similar, so that we're working with our process, but nonetheless mindful of those different sectors.
Those candidate packs that you guys put together are fantastic. I often share them on my LinkedIn, when I see jobs come up, and it's what you said about capturing the personality of the organization definitely comes through. I'm just always impressed by that description that kind of brings you into the culture right away, when you're reading through it. So
thank you.
Yeah. So I think you've been 16 years, I think you said, and how have you seen the skills and the qualifications that employers are looking for in advancement professionals evolve? Because I think you mentioned people switching in from other industries. We've seen kind of a shift in terms of thinking around events and the importance of events. We probably used to look for people who were strong event planners. Now we're looking for people who can engage a network. What are your thoughts on, how these advancement skills have evolved?
Yeah. I think ultimately, without there being a fundraising sort of degree, we've always kind of stood by the fact that fundraising and engagement advancement can be taught on the job largely, but there are some key competencies, I think, and skills that are resonant across any fundraiser that we probably look for, and in terms of those that are hired are almost sort of more important than that experience. In saying that, when we opened the Australia office, all anyone wanted was direct experience. And mostly direct major gift fundraising experience. And that was because there was so little of it. And so many organisations were starting out to really sort of build a much more strategic advancement operation, and just didn't have that know-how internally. So every organisation we spoke to just needed direct experience. There was not really any sort of thought for transferable skills or people, other people sort of coming in. A lot of people told us that Australia was 10 years behind the UK, 30 years behind the US in terms of that sort of philanthropic market and landscape and understanding. And it was because people here didn't like being asked, and philanthropy wasn't embedded in the culture. Actually, what it was that there just wasn't a culture of asking, and actually we're a very philanthropic country. So I think that sort of has been a bit of a turning point in terms of what organisations look for in their fundraising staff. Now that there's that sort of recognition that actually, there are some competencies there, and people can be trained in this work, given that I guess evolution from when we opened the office. So organisations, I think, are much more open to training their own, to considering transferable skills, to considering diverse pools of candidates, but it does depend on the organisation. So there are still a lot more opportunities than there are, candidates to fill them. And that's because more and more organisations are, starting these programs or finally investing in, a director of development where there's just been, community fundraising or whatever it might be. So again, in those instances, that direct experience is a requirement. You're right. I think the events side of things is still prevalent, but perhaps not as much of a focus for organisations as certainly that sort of honed one-on-one relationship management side of things. So.
Jocelyn, you mentioned in your previous comments about, the United States being perceived as so far ahead philanthropically, right, and the UK as well. And I've got no doubt that in your processes, you've had a lot of applicants from around the world, including from those two countries interested in roles in Australia. And you hinted in one of your other comments as well that sometimes you need to really be careful about screening for cultural fit. In terms of when someone may or may not work out based on where they're coming from and their sets of experiences. Can you talk a little bit, without sort of naming any names or anything, or specific situations where maybe a school took a chance on someone from another country and it didn't work out, and it didn't work out because it was a cultural thing, or maybe it worked out but it was strained, and like what would you advise a candidate let me say it again. What would you advise an advancement leader to be thinking about when considering bringing in someone from overseas?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think it's what does the organisation need to consider, but also what does the candidate need to come with in terms of mindset. And sometimes that can be changed and sometimes it can't. And I think that's where that sort of filtering process through the a rigorous interview process is really helpful. So where it doesn't work, I think, is where there's perhaps an expectation that what works in one country will work in another country, that the pace of major and principal gift fundraising might be, it's just so embedded that it can move relatively quickly. Internal advocates might be perhaps an easier conversation, or the donor expectation around an ask might be a little bit more immediate. So trying to transplant some of that sort of pace and that landscape into an Australian organisation without really getting to know the new country, the new culture, as well as the new role and the new organisation. It's a lot of hoops to go through or to jump through. And I think where that isn't really sort of tested from the very first conversation with us, and then with the organisation, what does that adaptability look like, even in sort of the interview process, giving examples and scenarios of what would you do and in these instances if this sort of roadblock came up that they might not have considered before. I think the other thing with international recruitment as well that our organisations should look for is I talked about the fact that our consultants are all, have all worked internationally. If people sort of haven't necessarily either travelled or worked elsewhere or even fundraised with donors who have been based elsewhere, and therefore they haven't had the opportunity to really understand different cultural nuances, have had to, start that mindset of where life is a little bit different. I think that can be problematic in sort of making those moves. Not always. It can be, assumptions can be drawn, but I think largely just from some of those recruitment experiences that, they're good little testing grounds.
Nicole, I know you've gone through some international recruitment experiences, as have I. But what have you, listening to Jocelyn, what kind of comes to mind? What have you seen?
Yeah, well, I'm actually just thinking back to some of our last couple of episodes, Ryan, because I think a lot of people have mentioned, we talk about sort of engaging alumni across cultures a lot on the show, and global fundraising efforts, and the opportunities and perils there. And I think one thing that has come through in everyone's response to those questions is just that the context is everything, right? And so, really having someone who can kind of understand the context and understand how to frame giving back in that particular cultural context, because we now know that it's a myth that, certain cultures just aren't philanthropic, right? It's not, it might not be, on the US model or the UK model or the whatever, but there's a way to talk about giving back that resonates with that culture. And, everyone across the world shares the joy of being able to give back to causes that they care about. And so that's kind of what's been going through my mind as I'm listening to you, in terms of that success. Is a lot of it has got to be around, that cultural awareness piece and a leader's ability to sort of tune into that, and then, and be able to kind of take those context clues and, build a strategy that works in that environment. So yeah, it's really interesting though.
Well, it's hard to believe, but we're bumping up against our first half hour here with Jocelyn. But before we leave and record our bonus segment, can you share who will be on the show coming up?
Yes. So our next guest on Alumless is Ted Probert from the Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation. I hope I'm saying Ted's surname correctly. Maybe I'm not. But our next guest on Alumless World is going to be Tess Nixon-Spiller, and she's a very highly respected fundraising coach here in the UK. And she's going to be talking about the essential building blocks for a successful fundraising strategy. And it should be a really interesting conversation because she's got a lot of thoughts on, self-improvement and reflection and the skills that leaders need to be working on. So I think it's kind of a nice complement to this episode, actually. So looking forward to that.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to record our bonus segment with Jocelyn. We're going to pick up the conversation where we left off, dive much deeper into the world of recruitment in the advancement space. But before we do, we're going to play a word from our sponsor, and we will see you after the break.
Thank you.